Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice and I, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to this episode of the Feeling Good podcast. And here we come with another Ask David. So, David, here's a few questions from our listeners. You ready for the first one?
Yep.
So this is from Debbie, who says, can you use Team CBT to help people with medical disorders such as Parkinsonism or cancer?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite areas, and you absolutely can. Team CBT, or even the old traditional cognitive therapy before we had Team CBT. This was always my favorite area clinically. Well, that and shyness are probably my two, social anxiety are my two favorite things to treat. And one of the reasons that I like treating people whose depression comes on in the context of a medical problem is because they're exceptionally easy to treat. And one of the reasons for that is if somebody develops Parkinson or cancer or multiple sclerosis and then gets depressed or anxious, they don't have a high goal of being depressed and anxious. Most of them want to recover because they want to make the most of their life. And so if you have some powerful tools to help them overcome the depression or anxiety, they often respond really, really fast. And it's so gratifying. And the short answer is I just use team therapy the way I would with any other patient. Just develop a daily mood log. What is the event that's upsetting you? Then circle your negative feelings and rate how strong each one is from 0 to 100, and then write down your negative thoughts. And you'll find that the negative thoughts have all the same distortions as someone without a medical illness. And when they challenge or crush the negative thoughts, they suddenly recover. I'll give you a couple quick examples, but also, I mean, we had a beautiful podcast on this that we can put the link to it. The live therapy with Marilyn, a dear colleague who went to her doctor and was told she had stage 4 lung cancer and she'd never smoked, and she was devastated. And if you listen to that podcast, which is one of our most beautiful podcasts ever, in my opinion, you'll see exactly how we work with somebody who has a severe medical illness, as well as depression, anxiety, in her case, also intense anger.
Yeah, for people who want to listen to it, they start on episode 49.
Oh, okay.
So 49, 50, and 51 are live session. And episode 52 also talks about people's responses to that, which also were tremendous. And then we had a follow-up, a tune-up session 8 weeks later, episode 59. So people can really get a good download of how to work with critical illnesses.
Yes, right. And then just to give two quick examples, when I was in Philadelphia, a salesman came to me, referred by a neurologist because he had multiple sclerosis. And he was intensely anxious, so he was referred to me for treatment. He's a really nice guy, and when I had him fill out his daily mood log, the upsetting event was, being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and that's a disease of the central nervous system, and sometimes I think spinal cord as well, where you get patches of demyelination. Where in other words, the nerves in a small area will stop functioning, and so you can get dizziness, you can get problems with motor strength or numbness, and typically the symptoms come and then they disappear and then they'll return. It kind of comes and goes, but it is
It can
serious.
lead to paralysis. I mean, it's
various kinds of symptoms, and he was like 100 on a 0 to 100 on anxiety, among other feelings, and he had shame and depression and discouragement and all of that. But what it really amounted to is he had the negative thought that he might stumble and fall at work.
Yeah.
Because he sometimes got dizzy and stumbled. That was one of his symptoms. And then I said, if suppose that happened, why is that upsetting to you? And then what it came down to is then my colleagues will look down on me. And he was in a form of sales where they have annual sales meetings, and you've got to be number one. And it was all very macho. You're supposed to be strong and have it all together. Mm-hmm. And so he was afraid then if he was weak, his colleagues would reject him. And of course, that's a typical distortion that you see in anyone who has social anxiety, which is mind reading.
And fortune telling.
Yeah, and fortune telling, exactly. And also emotional reasoning. I feel defective, so I must be defective. And also self-blame. If they should reject me, that means that it's my fault and that I'm a loser and that I'm not good enough. And so this is just a very simple, typical, in those days, cognitive therapy case. And we used a variety of techniques, but the one that was really killer, that was just blew everything out of the water, he agreed, although he was anxious to do it, to tell his colleagues that
survey technique?
Yeah, survey technique, because he'd been hiding it out of shame. And to ask them what they thought of him, and asked him, if I were to stumble and fall, what would you think of me? And this was very difficult for him to do. It was very terrifying. And then, as you might expect, he got an outpouring of warmth and support from his colleagues, and his anxiety suddenly disappeared. Mm-hmm. And the take home message here, which was the same with Marilyn and her lung cancer, it's not the illness that upsets you. It's not the external event, or in this case, perhaps an internal medical event that upsets you. It's your thoughts about it. And those thoughts will always be distorted and illogical if you're depressed and anxious. And when you challenge them and put the light to them, the anxiety will disappear. Now, you could still be very justified in having some sadness if you had multiple sclerosis, but that's not the same as having depression and panic and anxiety and feeling worthless. And I could give other examples of this, but I won't. It's just that every patient I've ever had who I've treated with these kinds of issues has been really easy and very gratifying to treat. Now, one of my students, who, if anyone read my book Feeling Good, you might remember Sterling Morey, the medical student from England. Yeah. And he worked with me.
I've never met him, nor have I, read anything by him. But just the way you describe him is just so endearing. So.
Oh yeah, he's the same way now. He's just really awesome. Of course, now he's a prominent and an older fellow like myself, and a leading cognitive therapist in England. But he wrote a book on cognitive behavior therapy for people with cancer.
Yeah,
he was very interested. We did a lot of work together in this area. And I see now you can get that on Amazon. Before the days of Amazon, it was impossible to get it. Mm-hmm. But you can order it, and I'll put the link to that book for anyone who wants to read about that.
Okay. The next question comes from Mark, who's asking us, how can I help a depressed family member or friend who is passive and doesn't want to do anything? I think we've had a question kind of like that before, but it's worth repeating. Yeah,
we have. I don't think it was this exact question. This
but
Mark, who is a great friend of Team CBT, so he's actually a famous neuroscientist who's come out from the East Coast to visit our Tuesday group and Sunday hikes on, I think, about 5 occasions now, and he's really a neat guy. And he did podcast number 100.
Yeah, we did a podcast with him. Yeah.
But the short answer to this, and maybe you can embellish it, is that I think in the role of a family member, attempts to help or cajole the person will kind of force them to continue to be passive and to resist. And I think you need to let your ego die as a family member, this idea that you're supposed to rescue or save this person, and instead use the 5 secrets of effective communication to provide warmth and understanding and be a good listener so the other person can kind of share their feelings and spill their guts and show where their heart is at without feeling like they're being told to do something or criticized or put down. Now that's easier said than done because it's hard to learn the 5 secrets, and listeners who would want to learn that can listen to our podcasts on how to do the 5 secrets of effective communication. But it also involves an internal change in the person to give up this idea that it's your job to rescue this person, and that it can be very hard for some people to let go of that role, to give yourself that role of the helper or rescuer.
Yeah.
And maybe you can embellish this a little bit.
Well, to begin with, don't even think, even if you're the best psychologist, that you can do therapy with a family member. It's not going to work. I've fortunately not put myself in that situation, but there's too much enmeshment. I mean, there's a lot of history with your family members, and you can't get around that.
Well, I love what you're saying. And so the idea that as a family member, then your role is just to listen and to support.
Yeah.
And you can ask the person, is this something that you'd want some help with?
Yeah. And
then maybe give them some tips. One thing you could do is to give them a copy of my book, Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, because more than 50% of the people that are given a copy of the book, improve or recover within 4 weeks. So that's something else that you could do for sure. You want to make a word or two about enmeshment and say why that would sabotage, a family member, giving help to a family member or treating a family member?
Well, so, as a family member, you have a vested interest in whether the other person is or isn't depressed. And so you cannot be neutral. You cannot, you can if you try, but really you don't want to see your sibling or your spouse or your child be in that situation. And so you're trying to help, and you're not going to be doing you cannot do good therapy if you have this need to help. That's where the enmeshment comes in.
I love it. So you'll put them under pressure. You'll pressure yourself and them.
Yeah. At the worst end of the scale would be, be happy for me.
Yeah.
You may not say it in this way, but
if you're depressed, maybe it's a negative reflection on me.
Yeah.
I like that.
What did I do to you?
Yeah, but our words might not work for some people, because I've seen people who are very controlling toward their children, and I've told them, you need to become a better listener, and they've said things like, "Oh, I'm an excellent listener. I don't need any help with that," and yet they're the most controlling, demanding person imaginable. Yeah. And on the other side of the ledger, I was successful. A colleague drove me to an airport after a recent workshop and said that she was very overly controlling toward her daughter, her grown daughter, and always trying to, tell her daughter what to do, and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And we just kind of talked about it in the car a little bit. And then she actually called her daughter while we were in the car, who was on the other side of the country, and had a little dialogue. And she said after that, she just stopped trying to control her daughter, and the relationship improved a lot. So there is helping. And the daughter in this case was just a very lovely young woman, and just wasn't doing everything her mother wanted her to be doing. Yeah.
So the short answer is just listen.
Yeah. Learn how to listen. Yeah. And if you want to learn how to listen, read my book, Feeling Good Together. If you want to master the 5 secrets, that would be a way to learn how to do it. Of course, Mark, who asked the question, is very good with the 5 secrets.
Yeah. I have a question from Paul, who's asking us, how can I get over death anxiety? So it goes even beyond illness here.
Yeah, well, on death anxiety...
and by the way, this can come at any age. I have a 25-year-old who has death anxiety.
Yeah, there's two different ways that I approach it, and I'll be a little brief because I'm a little close to losing my voice. But one thing is that when people are afraid of death, they're often afraid of something else that's going on in their life. There's something like they're mad at somebody, or there's a conflict about school or the job, and they're kind of sweeping it under the rug, and then, oh, I'm so afraid of death. But there really is often some other thing. That's, of course, the hidden emotion model that we've talked about in previous podcasts. And then there's the technique that I developed to get over the fear of death. And I know I did this on someone else's podcast, but did we ever do a podcast on overcoming the fear of death?
I don't think that you and I did.
Oh, well, I'll explain how it works then, because it's really interesting, and it's. First place, Irv Yalom says, I've heard that he claims that the fear of death is the core psychological problem behind a whole lot of depression and anxiety. Well, is that true? Or?
It's a common idea in existential therapy.
Yeah, and he's an existential therapist. And personally, I haven't had that experience. I've only seen, I would say, in my whole career, 3 or 4 patients came to me with the fear of death. Now, I'm ignoring panic disorder patients who have the fear that they're going to die of a heart attack. That's treated differently, and we've had podcasts on that. That's real easy to treat. But I mean just people with the existential fear of death. And the way I do it, and I might say that every time I've done this with a patient, it takes about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. At the end, they say, oh, that wasn't helpful at the end of the session. And then they come back the next week and they say, I'm cured. So it's weird the way it works. But I say there's 3 things that you could be afraid of in the fear of death. One is you could be afraid of the moment leading up to the moment of death. Yeah. You could be afraid of the moment of death, or you could be afraid of the time after you're dead. Yeah. So then I say to the patient, what is it that which of those 3 are you afraid of? And so if they say, well, I'm afraid of the moment leading up to death, then I would say, well, that's life. That's not death. And what is it you're afraid of? And maybe you're afraid of pain. Well, we have, good pain medicines, and maybe I'm afraid of, saying goodbye to a loved one. Well, is that something you know how to do? And can you share your feelings and your love and blah, 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 and get them to see, that's not the fear of death. It's the fear of life. And those are problems that can generally be solved very well. Then if they say, well, it's the moment of death, I say, well, actually, that's just what happens to you every night when you go to sleep. Are you afraid of going to sleep? No, I'm not. Well, then there's nothing to be afraid of there. Then if they say, well, it's actually the time after I'm dead I'm afraid of. And I say, well, there's 2 possibilities here. There will be something or nothing after you die. Yeah. If there's nothing, you have nothing to be afraid of. Right. And if there's something, you can thank your lucky stars that there's an afterlife, and whatever comes up there, you can deal with it. And if you'll learn Team CBT, you'll have some great skills. So I go through that, and they say, oh, that's just too intellectual for me. This is too rational. And then, as they say, then they come back and say, no, it worked. And I've never had someone that didn't work for.
I think that sometimes the fear of death is this anticipatory grief, meaning you haven't lost life yet, but you're projecting yourself into a future where you have lost life. And even though then you will not be grieving, you're grieving in advance.
I asked John Rush once about this. He was one of the early cognitive therapists and became biological mainly in his career. But he was one of my classmates at Penn in my residency class. And I said, how do you help someone who says, well, this isn't the fear of death, but as I get older, I'll regret all the things that I haven't done.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you talk back to that negative thought? And he said, oh, well, you can, number one, you could think about all the things that you have done. And then you could also ask yourself, you've done some of the things you want to do in your life, but you haven't done all of the things you wanted to do in your life. What percentage would be satisfactory for you? How many things would you have to do to feel happy and fulfilled? And I thought, oh yeah, that's a good point. There's tons of things I haven't done, and I'm never going to do them. And I don't really give a shit. I don't mean to be crude. I shouldn't have said that. I'm not supposed to use that word. I apologize. But it's, when you think about it, how many things do you have to do to have had a fulfilling life? But I can point to one thing that I've done. That's when our little black kitty Misty comes up and I pet her. She turns over on her back and she exposes her tummy and I start stroking it. I'm on the bed and she's next to me and she starts purring and squeaking. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. And that's something I can look back on.
Yeah. Well, we could have a whole show on regrets, I think. Next one is from Suna. And I don't know if it's a he or she.
I think it's a she, but I'm not sure.
How can you distinguish shyness from a personality disorder such as avoidant personality disorder?
And we're going to do a show for her and for this other guy, Dan, who have both experienced very severe social anxiety. We won't focus on the treatment of that now, but we're going to have 2 consecutive shows on how to treat social anxiety, shyness, public speaking anxiety, stuff like that.
I mean, nowadays they hardly distinguish avoidant personality disorder and social anxiety.
Well, that's my point exactly. There is no such thing as avoidant personality disorder. It's just that if your shyness gets real severe, they call it avoidant personality disorder, but there is no such thing, and that's the answer. But the good news is whether your shyness is mild, moderate, severe, or extreme, it can be very, very treatable. It's one of my favorite things to treat.
Okay. Here's from Sly. Do you believe in the Big 5 personality traits model? And will your therapy tools change these big 5 traits? I got a score of 67 on neuroticism. Neuroticism, which means I am more prone to anger, depression, anxiety, and vulnerability, and tend to think about things in a pessimistic way. If I do the exercises in your books and develop a more realistic outlook on myself and others, does it follow that my, quote, personality traits will get more or less changed?
Well, the answer to that is yes.
So does that mean that those are not personality traits?
Yeah, there's no such thing as a personality trait. That's just an imaginary construct, once again. But this fellow Sly sounds like he's more prone to depression and anger and anxiety and vulnerability. And 50% of the population is more than average in these areas. Mm-hmm. And that just means you have more depression or more anger. And then you use the techniques in the book, a daily mood log. And what is the focus on one moment when you're upset, not some non-existent personality trait, but a moment that you were angry or depressed. And then circle your emotions. What was the event, and what are your negative thoughts? And then you can do positive reframing, and you do a recovery circle, and use all these techniques to crush those thoughts. I always work through specificity. I don't try to work on this general level, because you tend to spin your wheels. I don't know if I've said enough on this, but maybe you can put in your own thinking here, Fabrice.
Well, my question is, are you saying that the Big 5 personality traits are not valid?
Well, it's a matter of usefulness. The validity would be how you would evaluate a psychological test, and that's more of a statistical concept. But I don't find the concept neuroticism helpful I like specific terms like depression, anxiety, feeling ashamed, feeling angry. What's a moment when you were feeling these things, and let's show you how to turn that around.
How about the other factors in the model?
I was going to look them up on Google. I don't even remember what they are.
So they're you can remember then by using the acronym OCEAN.
Oh,
so O is for openness to experience. C is for conscientiousness.
Contentiousness?
Conscientiousness.
Oh, conscientious.
It's the opposite of procrastination, essentially.
Oh, okay.
E is for extroversion. A is for agreeableness. And N is what Slide described, neuroticism.
Okay. Well, it can be fun to take tests like that. And kind of see how you score, but I wouldn't think of it as too much more than kind of a parlor game, personally.
So you don't think it's useful?
Fun, huh?
You don't think it's useful?
It wouldn't be useful for me.
Yeah,
I don't have any use for it, but somebody could find it fun and useful.
Okay. All right. This is from Heike, who's asking, what if you've battled your negative thoughts and self-defeating beliefs and still don't feel happy? An absence of depression and anxiety does not necessarily mean more joy in life. How can you help people find out where they want to go in life, who they want to be, and what it is that brings them happiness?
Well, it's a beautiful question and beautifully expressed, and we appreciate all of these questions that you folks submit to us. And I might say we've got another file filled with fabulous questions. We've got an abundance of riches there, and should be able to get some good future Ask Davids, or Ask David and Fabrice.
Yeah, keep asking your questions.
But there's two answers that I have to this. First of all, most people who have say I've battled negative thoughts and self-defeating beliefs and still don't feel happy, it's because they haven't successfully crushed their negative thoughts. When you can be using, cognitive techniques or techniques from a variety of schools of therapy and still have the belief that you're bad, that you're not good enough, that, that people are going to reject you, people are going to judge you, whatever your negative thoughts happen to be. And so the first thing I would think of with a person is, let's take a look at your daily mood logs and let's see if you've really crushed your negative thoughts and brought them to zero, and all of your negative thoughts, feelings, depression and shame and anger and everything have gone to zero, because this sounds to me like incomplete treatment. So that would be point number one. Now, point number two, to take it in a slightly different direction, then I want to get your feedback on this, Fabrice, is that it is absolutely true that the absence of depression doesn't mean the presence of great joy. Now, in my clinical work, usually when people's depression scores go all the way to zero and they've crushed all of their negative thoughts, they do go into a euphoric state. They do experience great joy. But it is theoretically possible to have your depression go down to a very low level and still not feel happy. And that's why on the brief mood survey we have, and I have a new version of it to show you, there's a new 5-item happiness test. That's the exact opposite of my depression test.
Okay.
And the absence of depression doesn't necessarily imply the presence of great happiness. And so, but if someone says, I want more happiness, again, I would never work on a general level. I would never say, oh, well, here are some methods here's positive psychology for you, or here's how to figure out where you want to go in life. To me, all that stuff is kind of bullshit. And I apologize for being a cynic. That's me. That's how I operate. But what I would say to the person is, oh, well, give me a particular moment in your life that you were not as happy as you would like to be. What time of day was it? Where were you? Who were you interacting with? What did they say? What did you say next? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? And focus in on something very, very specific. And once you solve that problem at that specific moment in time, generally the problem as a whole will disappear. So it's exactly the same method that I use for helping people get over depression or panic or anger or shame or loneliness or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this really speaks to the fact that happiness or misery is happening in the moment.
Yes.
It's not happening yesterday, it's not happening tomorrow, it's happening now.
Yes, right.
And if you look at what's happening now, and if you can solve the now, you can solve every moment of your life.
Well, I just love what you're saying. And there will always be something that the person isn't attending to. You see, maybe they're unhappy in their job and they need to make a decision of applying for work elsewhere or discussing with their boss the fact that they haven't had a raise in some time, or they're unhappy with something in their life, they're conflicted, they want a date, but they're afraid of, they're shy and they're afraid of rejection. There will always be some specific thing that they're unhappy about. And as you say, once you show them how to solve that problem, the whole system of unhappiness will tend to fall apart.
Yeah.
And they will find out then what their goals are in life. They'll find by solving that one minute, because everything is encapsulated in that one moment.
Yeah.
Well, that
sounds like a good answer to me.
Ask David.
And yes, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fabrice. Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.